my name is Sean Robertson, and I'm the Scottish Fisheries Co-ordination Centre Manager at Fisheries Management Scotland. And today I want to talk about a project that we've been undertaking over the past year, really, to do with the creation of fishery management plans for Scotland, and how these might provide some opportunities for nature finance investment. So I imagine a lot of you will have had some dealings with district salmon fishery boards or fisheries trusts, but just for the benefit of anyone who's not, a brief overview on freshwater fisheries management is Atlantic salmon and sea trout are managed at local levels by district salmon fishery boards, and there's a handy map of DSFBs in Scotland there. District salmon fishery boards have statutory responsibilities as set out in the Salmon and Freshwater Fisheries Act of 2003. So they have quite broad-ranging powers for enforcement, but they're quite limited to focus on salmon and sea trout. And as fisheries managers, their role is to manage the commercial exploitation within the fishery and to ensure that action is taken within the district to maximise the output of wild, healthy juveniles, and an adequate number of adults are able to reach their spawning grounds to successfully reproduce. And as I mentioned, DSFBs have quite a limited remit as dictated by the Act of Parliament, but in many districts a charitable fisheries trust also exists with a much wider remit, and we've got a map of fishery trusts across Scotland on the bottom there. So fisheries management planning, it's quite a dry subject, so I'm not going to labour over these points too much, but this provides a framework for DSFBs to document and undertake evidence-based management of Atlantic salmon and sea trout in their fisheries. Developing fisheries management plans on a consistent basis across Scotland has quite a number of advantages, and we'll see some of these today in the dashboards and story maps and other tools that we've created here. So these include facilitating the collation of local knowledge from multiple areas to highlight the regional and national issues of greatest importance. That sounds a bit dry, but there's a really nice visual you'll see later on. And when pulled together, emerging themes across multiple plans could be used to leverage additional resources for fisheries management and identify areas where more general changes may be required to existing regulatory frameworks. And this has been done in the past. I think there was funding made previously in the late 2000s of able to do this, but advances in technology mean they can produce in a format that's more accessible to audiences and end users, but also allows data to be aggregated and interrogated. Whereas previously the end product of this process was a large PDF document that you would struggle to collate across national levels and look at what different districts are doing in a sort of one-stop shop. And funding was made available from Crown Estate Scotland and the Marine Directorate to undertake this work. So the structure and content of the plans, due to funding being received from two different organisations, the project was split into two phases, with the plans being functional at the end of the first phase. So in phase one, we have a section on fisheries management arrangements within the district. Is there a DSFB? Is there a fisheries trust? Do the two work together? What are their staffing levels and their resources? That sort of thing. And then the main task from phase one was the creation of the priorities for management action. So each contributing organisation, of which there were 44, were given a blank Excel template to fill in. So each row on the Excel sheet would be a point on the map, which would be an action that they were going to undertake within the next 5 years or hope to. And then this Excel file was taken by us, converted into a map and edited by the organisations. And phase two on the right there is currently ongoing, where there's more information on catchment descriptions, population monitoring, enforcement, development of the fishery, and education and outreach that are being added to it. The technical side of things, again, this is not something I'll labour too much because it's the actual story maps and the dashboard that I really want to show. We used Esri's ArcGIS system. I think quite a number of agencies are using this at the moment, which is great to see. And it's really the versatility of it and the various integrated online platforms that made us go for this. And one of the major advantages was this negated the need for contributing organisation to have specialist software or powerful computers. So it made taking this work on a lot more accessible to organisation with different resource levels. Additionally, some organisations already have an account with Esri, so they were able to use their own account to work on this project, or if they didn't, we were able to give them a temporary login so that they could undertake this. So priorities for management action were filled in by contributors as an Excel template, with these being converted to a point feature layer. And we created blank story maps for contributing organizations to fill in. These are the interface that end users will interact with, and we'll see that in a moment as well. But there was quite a lot of action behind the scenes to create the empty story maps and empty web maps and a couple of other things that go along with it. And the technical side of updating the online layer as different organizations were submitting their Excel templates in real time was quite challenging. But with this software, we managed to do it, which I was very pleased with in the end when we got the workflow working. And the management actions have also been integrated into a dashboard which allows for interrogation of actions at local and national scales and can provide summaries of costs, total numbers of actions, and a host of other information, which we are shortly going to take a look at. So this is my cue to show the story map and then a dashboard. So there are 44 of these story maps which have been produced. I'm just going to go over one of them to give a flavour of what they look like. So this is one that's had been completed at the end of phase one. There is still more information from phase two to go in here. But again, it will give you a flavour of what's been possible. So we start off with our fisheries management in the district section, a bit about the district salmon fishery board, their aims and objectives. They can link to annual reports and other external information in here. A brief description of the catchment, different regions or catchments within the district is included in there. But we've also done a little bit of work in phase two to make this as yet another online interactive map that pulls in other data such as river gauging stations, the habitat map of Scotland, national forest inventory, deer count densities, geology information from the British Geological Survey. And we've been able to use a lot of different online layers and incorporate them into this. So it's been quite exciting, but that's still in the works. But the main sort of output from the first phase of the project was, again, this priorities for management action. So at the district scale, you can see all the points on the map with each point being an action. And the actions were split into what type of action is being undertaken here. So we've got the legend here for barrier mitigation, improving in-stream habitat, controlling invasive species, land management, riparian tree planting, lobbying research, just to pull out a couple of them. And on the left here, it allows for a nice narrative to be given to explain the actions that are being undertaken. So, for example, illegal exploitation being the first one, there's a bit of description, a nice image, but also a button can take you to the relevant point on the map. But the advantage of this is you can just click on the point, and for an end user, they can get a lot more information on what's the name of the action, a bit of a description, what pressure is it addressing, what's the objective, the proposed management action strategy as well, how will the organisation go about undertaking that action. And this information is most of what, or all of what was captured in the Excel file. There are a few other fields that aren't included in the pop-up here, but largely that's what we've got. And it's quite a nice tool, this, because again, the contributing organisation can incorporate a lot of what they want to. They've got their conservation policy in here, links to catch and release guidance. So for an audience that a DSFB or a fishery trust would be engaging with, this is really slick, I think. It's engaging, and I think people are probably more likely to interact with this than they are a 70-page PDF, but it allows you to link to lots of other different sources of information as well. So again, this is just one example of one of the completed plans. But the other sort of key output of this work, which I'm quite happy with, is the dashboard. And it's the dashboard that I think might be quite relevant to nature finance. So we've aggregated all the priorities for management action across Scotland into this map here. So it's telling us there are 1,155 in total. We have a summary of the status, so how many are planned, ongoing, not possible, initiated or complete. We have the percentage of the pressure that these actions are addressing, be that water temperature, quantity, predation, obstacles to fish passage, marine developments, and lots of others. We've got the number of actions partially funded, numbers with full external funding, and we've got the scale of management actions in the selection. So this is quite a nice overview, but we can start digging into this a lot more. So if we want to select a priority, and let's say I want to look at everything that's high priority across Scotland. So that's filtered down our actions and these as well. But it's quite interesting to look at the pressures that these actions are addressing. So most of them have multiple pressures. Obstacles to fish passage is quite a significant chunk of those as well, as is in-stream and riparian habitat. If we want to, we can even filter this further and look at individual regions. For example, if I'm just going to pick on the Ness again, look at the Ness, water quantity, and again, obstacles to fish passage are significant portions of the management actions that are high priority in their region. Some information on the funding, but again, that's also filtered out the scale of actions as well. So we can see how many are targeted location, coastal, river, catchment, or whole district scales. And it also filters out the left hand here. We've got what would be in the pop-up, but it's just a bit more visual and nicer for an end user to look at. So people can scroll through there and that will show the actions that are in the selection. But I'm able to create new tabs in these dashboards as well. So I've got this one that's focused on actions, but I've also got a finance-based one. So here we've got, again, the actions at a national scale, but we've got more information on the costs, so total capital costs, total annual costs, so running costs and maintenance, and in-kind contributions. So this is money that DSFBs and fishery trusts are putting into these themselves, and information on how many have funding secured, how many are unfunded, and how many are partially funded. And again, if we look at sort of, let's go for, well, actually, there's another filter we have here of different management actions. And again, this might be quite relevant in the back of my mind for anyone with a nature finance hat looking at it, looking to invest in things. So if they wanted to look at peatland restoration actions across Scotland, they can filter that out and see how many are here. They can click on the dot to get a bit more information on that specific action, and even we can make available in these pop-ups the cost. So like the capital cost in here, about 5 million, and I'll speak more on the costing elements in a little bit. But again, if we go back into this and wanted to look at riparian tree planting, we can look at all these actions that are across Scotland. Now, the only sort of downside is some of these will be relating to targeted location at maybe an individual site, and some of these points will be sort of whole catchment scale. So that's the one bit of complexity that is hard to cover in the symbology here. But if I were to filter out, so let's say we want to look at stuff in the Kyle of Sutherland. We don't appear to have one there. So let's say Loch Lomond. That's telling us that the one action there is at the catchment scale. And we've got more information on completion times that are estimated within that. So it's quite a useful thing, being able to aggregate all the different actions across districts that we weren't able to do if we were just getting them to produce PDF management plans. But there are some limitations at the moment that we're trying to address in phase 2. So we're reviewing the process at the moment, and I'll continue on. So how could this be used for nature finance? Well, in my view, the dashboard shows the status of many actions which will benefit the freshwater environment, from riparian tree planting, barrier removal, improving in-stream habitat, and many others. Many of these actions have also been costed. This system, or one like it, could act as a sort of mitigation bank of potential projects for investors to view with the aim of funding. Some further work may be needed to understand what investors would be looking for, but in my opinion, a lot of key information on scale, cost, strategy, type of action, project partners, and timescales have already been identified. So there's a lot here that's kind of ready to go. And if not for a project that an investor could throw money at that day, I think what we've got here could at least pique interest in attracting some investment. And this can also act as a register of completed projects as time goes on, which could allow contributors to share strategies for various actions which were successful, as well as how to overcome challenges. So the next steps, phase 2 is currently ongoing. This involves a review of the point file to capture information on costing certainty, primary funding, organisation, and shortfall. And this is one of the key parts of my review of this. Is some organisations have undertaken tree planting work before, for example, and have detailed information on costs already, where others might not have undertaken that kind of work. So the certainty in their estimate for their cost is a lot lower. So I'm just trying to capture that variation in costing certainty here. But I think adding a column or a field for any funding shortfall, that would be a interesting one for any potential investors to see as well. Just because I think at the heart of it, they'll be interested in numbers. How much money have they got to spend? How much money does this project need? In addition, more sections of the story map will be completed, as I went over earlier, and the ability to review actions has been built into the process with unfilled fields for status, progress, description, cost, and challenges after 5 years. So I've got a map here, which is just quite a basic example one, looking at a review progress field. So you can see some are kind of red as for ongoing, some are blue for planned, and there's one that's green for complete. There's more in the back end to capture actions and challenges from the review process as well. But as just a sort of map-based view, I think this kind of shows what we're able to do. But we can also keep adding actions to it as the review goes on and priorities shift and new things happen. So hopefully there's some longevity in this project as well. And I think I've talked for long enough. So if anyone's got any questions, we'll go over that just now. Or if anyone wants me to bring the dashboards back up, I'd be happy to do so.
Great stuff, Sean. I'm just going to jump in because there's a few questions which I'll read out to you actually from the chat. The first one is, are the story maps publicly available?
Yes, so these are publicly available at the moment, and I could share a link to those. They are going to be worked on further, so what you see just now today isn't the finished article, so just bear that in mind.
Okay, that's great. And then there's another one, and I'll let other folk come in, of course, but I'll just go through those that are in the chat. So there's a question here from Louise Bond. How is the interdependence of actions captured? Does that link to the priority of actions?
That's a very good question. And I think that's complexity that I probably wasn't able to capture in this process at the moment, because we've got lots of different organisations with a range of specialisms, some with dedicated GIS officers that could do a better job than I could on this, but others who don't have that resource. So there were different ways to approach this where we could have river lines with information attached to those, but for accessibility reasons, I thought an Excel file that people populate and then is changed into a point layer would be the easiest way to do it. But interdependence of actions, that's not something that I'd been able to capture in this. But if you have any ideas, do please share them after this.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the perspective, you were talking about, different audiences that would use this dashboard, which I think is amazing and it's brilliant to see. And yeah, it's a fantastic resource. And I was just thinking in terms of the different audiences for this from the nature finance angle, that they might be looking at a particular perspective of river restoration and be interested in certain actions which are dependent on each other. Could you almost like package those up into almost like a sort of portfolio of different projects that would help deliver those type of actions, and that might be quite attractive. So I was just thinking, and equally ones that from a sort of an ecological perspective are dependent on each other, for in terms of like riparian invasives, you'd want to do that as well as looking at your riparian tree planting, for example. You'd want them to be sort of programmed in relation to each other in terms of timescale and priority. So yeah, it was just a point of, I think this resource is amazing and great to see it. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, thanks. I think sort of reflecting on that, I think I could include some sort of categorical grouping to get those actions to pop up under sort of a single selector. But that's, something to bear in mind for a review down the line, for sure.
And then there's another question here. I've got two questions actually, but they're kind of similar, which is how can relevant new and or missing data be added to this from other nature restoration projects that are being carried out, which would include those not being identified through the district salmon fishery boards or the rivers and fisheries trusts?
Yep. That's another good question. So I think there would be a couple of different ways to do it. If we made the Excel template available, then those projects could be sort of filled out as rows, adhering to our existing schema and field names and descriptions, and then that would work quite well. The second way it could be done is for actions out with this project to be done as their own separate layer. I'd still want to maintain a lot of the same schema so that these systems work well and are integrated, but that would allow for any other fields to be included that this project hasn't done that they would need. Sorry, I hope that makes sense.
I think so. We've got some nods there. I'll let folk. I'll just Rowan, I see you've got your hand up. I'm just going to cover off these other couple of questions, and then it'll be nice to have voices, not just mine, and then we have a bit more sort of vocal interaction. So there's a question here which is, alongside environmental need of project costs, investors would also require information on what credits that they'd be able to purchase? Is any of that information also incorporated?
At the moment, no. And again, I think that's because the sort of credit market for stuff other than carbon and peatland is quite developing at the moment. So I didn't feel that I had information like that to include, but I think further down the line, once that does get developed a bit more, that could be added as other fields within this. It wouldn't be too difficult to do so.
Great, okay, thanks. And then finally, the last question I've got at the moment is how do boards and trusts engage locally beyond their trustees, board members and proprietors, so that one can know what it is they're planning and what they're intending carrying out?
Yeah, so I think there are the boards in Scotland are all quite different beasts to each other. There are some that work very closely with some aren't very well resourced, so their engagement isn't that great beyond their core duties under statute. But there are some that are much well resourced, will take on volunteers, hold public events, and some that will work with their sort of sister fisheries trust to do those kind of things as well. So yeah, there's lots of variation in engagement beyond these members across the different boards. And also in terms of kind of geographic areas, in some areas like the Forth, population is really high, and they're able to get lots of community engagement projects as alongside what they do. But in other areas, maybe in the far north of Scotland, where population density is quite low, it can be quite hard to engage with the public beyond your immediate audience, even for sort of volunteering days. And that comes from experience of trying to get people out. But I think this tool here and the outputs from these story maps, again, it's quite accessible to people. So I think this could be another really good engagement tool for, beyond that initial proprietor and board member audience.
Okay, I'm gonna let other folks speak now because I can see there's some keenness to get on in there. And David, I realise that question was from you. I'll let you come back to that, but in the meantime, Brodman, you've had your hand up for a little while. Brodman, over to you.
Thanks, and yeah, thanks, Sean. Just a quick follow-up question to your response about the potential for additional projects that may not be directly linked to the management plans of fisheries boards and river trusts. You mentioned a couple of ways that could potentially be done. Is there kind of like a plan for that that Excel template to be made available and reaching out to other projects that may have relevant data to contribute? And if so, what's the timescale for that?
So currently there isn't any plans at the moment. I think that would have to be driven by interest. So because we've only completed phase 1 of the project, I'm kind of waiting until phase 2 is completed to really push this and the outputs. So I think the deadline for that is round about sort of March for getting phase 2 done. So once that's happened, I really want to, show off what has been achieved here. And I think if we do get lots of engagement from organisations other than the boards who are wanting to include sort of more general nature restoration projects on this, then we'd look at that. But technically, from sort of a IT perspective, it would be possible.
Great, thanks. And David, over to you. David Holly.
Thank you. I'll just put my camera up. Oh, I'm on. Right, there we go. Yeah, I was interested in the resourcing thing that you said there, Sean, about how they're all kind of, there's a variation in how much, I suppose, fuel they've all got in the tank to do whatever it is they want to do. So how are the boards and trusts resourced? And if they're given a statutory duty, are they actually given public money?
So the boards, as part of their powers in the Act of Parliament, they can raise a levy from landowners who have fishing rights. So that's how district salmon fishery boards are funded. But the sort of district's assessment, so the amount that they can raise from the levy is directly related to the number of salmon that are caught. And as salmon catches are going down and down, that's going to present a problem for funding in the long term. Whereas fishery trusts, they don't raise a levy, so they have to try and get, you know, philanthropic funding from others, or they'll go for public funding, and mostly it's a lot of sort of project-based funding. So
sure, yeah, that's basically what I kind of understand to be the case, I guess. And I suppose balanced against that is the extent of kilometres of river that some of the trusts have compared with others. And when you look at the dots on the map and compare that with the size of the fisheries in some of these areas, it's quite interesting contrast between one area and the next, which isn't. Yeah, I think a kind of supplementary question to that is, you know, their ability therefore to engage with wider kind of, I suppose, ecosystem and catchment-based initiatives which are happening, you know, away from the river, but which obviously impact the river. And I think one of the things that would be interesting, as well as looking at the resourcing and try and get more to happen, which I think would be good, is just, you know, the potential to capitalise on connectivity between river boards and everybody else in the landscape who's doing similarly minded stuff, I guess, Sean, you know, without being specific.
Yep. No, that's a really good point. But I would hope that sort of a tool like this can go away towards maybe getting the ball rolling on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Yeah.
Grant.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I mean, absolutely, you know, working together, collaborating on similar aims is absolutely key to getting landscape scale approaches delivered on the ground. So whether it's, you know, peatland restoration, you know, at the top of the watershed, you know, coming down through riparian planting and all the rest of it, that, you know, others, you know, might also be carrying out to the benefit of rivers' health, then absolutely yes, it makes absolute perfect sense to be, you know, pointing in the same direction as other catchment scale initiatives. And there are many examples of that where it's working very well. It just so happens I'm going down to Dumfries tomorrow. That's on Friday. Losing which day of the week it is.
A place that I know very well, Paul. So
well,
I used to in a previous life have something to do with the common good fisheries, which run through the middle of the town. So yeah, well known to me.
Yeah. So yeah, so there are many examples of where there's, you know, collaborative and joint working. And I think increasingly it has to be said that, you know, the boards and the trusts are realizing the importance of looking, you know, beyond, you know, the rivers and up into the wider landscape. And of course, you know, the rivers obviously run through and arise from, you know, the surrounding land and so forth. So no, that's really important.
Absolutely right. Thank you.
So there's another couple of things here for you, Sean. If I can just find them. There was one from Claire I noticed. Oh, that's right. So Claire Cooper is doing a lot of community engagement work and gathering participatory data. Is there a way that this kind of science can be incorporated into the story maps?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the story maps themselves, that data would be quite easy to incorporate. What we're doing is, for sort of the catchment description and some for fish distribution, we have different interactive maps that appear as people scroll down the page. So other data that's gathered by communities could be incorporated into one of those kind of views, as well as, again, and a sort of dashboard view that could be incorporated as a different layer, but the dashboard just has to be tailored to what the focus of the goal is. But from a technical perspective, yeah, more data could be incorporated into it.
And there was a question here, which is probably common to so many of us in the room or in the rooms, which is all around this whole pipeline of projects idea. So the question from Susan is asking, any thoughts on the difficulties posed by advertising projects if landowners are not fully signed up? So I guess the question really is, are all of these projects that are listed on the dashboard and in the story maps, are these projects that the landowners are already signed up to, or are they prospective, aspirational, would like to see type projects?
So there's a bit of a mix, to be honest. In the original brief, we encouraged organisations to put actions in, even if they weren't possible for whatever reason, because what we were really wanting to do was highlight some of the barriers to getting these actions undertaken, and try and sort of look at those barriers at regional and national scales and see if there was anything that would be worth trying to engage with government about. And that will still be ongoing at the end of this. I think after phase 2, we'll be able to really sort of dig into those kind of details. So there will be some where a landowner will be on board with a project, but funding might be the issue. There might be some listed where landowner agreements are the issue. But I've sort of just been going over the overall process, so I'm not familiar with individual actions to that degree. But yeah, it is a tricky situation, although what I will say is that we've tried to make sure that the boards have had sign off on this, so it's not just been the staff members that are undertaking this work. So we do expect some element of consultation to be going on before these plans are over the line.
And then there's another question which is pretty much allied to that, which is, are there any intentions to share this? Well, if it's a publicly available tool, then it could be shared, but is it being proactively shared with potential investors?
So yeah, I mean, it'll be publicly available. It is at the moment, indeed. So it could be shared with private investors. I think what I've been sort of hedging my bets on is finishing phase 2 first before really pushing it in that direction. Again, it's just some of the elements that I wanted to capture, some of the uncertainty and variation in how things have been costed, and any sort of shortfall for actions as well, because I think that kind of information is something that would be really useful to anyone looking to invest.
That's great, thanks. And I think I'm just getting to the last. Oh, well, yeah, David has just commented on yeah, on the answer to the question whether or not landowners are signed up. So yeah, that's great. So we're open house now. And Simon, you're in there very quickly. On you go, Simon.
Hi, Sean. It's fantastic work. You probably said, when does the phase 2 start and for how long?
So phase 2 is ongoing at the moment, and we're hoping it to be completed by the start of March.
Okay, well, okay. And then I guess one maybe for Patrick, is there opportunity to connect with other kind of data collection programs like the Nature Networks program, and also I believe Credit Nature are looking at trialing some regional baselining as well?
Yep, I guess that's the whole point of having these mapping exercises at some points. But like Sean mentioned, there's a question about what kind of credits, I guess, would be I'm gonna say advertised on the map, on the project, and trying to make it relevant in terms of you need a certain quantity of credits available to really attract relevant investors or buyers, I should say. So if we get to that point where we have enough inertia, enough amount of credits per different frameworks, then would make total sense. But of course, I think the whole point is at some point to be able to blend all the different data streams together. So that's raised the question about data compatibility and how we actually plug the different channels together to gather the data. But that's the ambition, I would say.
That's useful to hear you say that, Patrick. I mean, folk on the call may know that Fisheries Management Scotland currently has a Ferns bid, which is in essence to establish a source to sea restoration fund. Much of it will be very much sort of catchment focused. And what I'm very interested in, and it allies to the work that Sean is working on here, which is to get that sort of national view of near to ready type projects at scale. Now, there may not be one that satisfies an investor, but there could well be a basket. So this whole idea of aggregated projects of a general type of intervention, whether it is riparian tree planting, whether it's peatland restoration, whether it's some form of natural flood management, there's a limited range of options across all of these catchments as identified by the boards and trusts, that together, they represent investment at huge scale. So, there's a real opportunity here to scale it up into a national picture. And I think that's the important thing. It's to get scale identified, costed, presented in such a way that there's a relatively simplistic, but behind it, complex and detailed picture that can be put together. And of course, behind all of that, we come to the whole question of metrics. And the credits that have been mentioned, the missing middle, if you like, which we all are working on. So that's not a plug, it's a challenge that we've undertaken.
No, that's great,
David.
and I'll just
Yes,
mention
yeah,
that. Sorry,
yeah.
just
Yeah,
before
go on.
David comes in. So that's one of the ambition of the community of practice we're trying to build around the ferns. So because we're gonna get visibility through the ferns, and if we get all the project to come together and find some way to aggregate, as you mentioned, that would be really one great outcome for the community of practice.
It is, and just to add one other thing to that, Patrick, is that the interesting thing is across the ferns family of projects, there are aspects of each that will be of benefit to others, literally of practical and sharing benefits. So we absolutely have our eye on that, not to reinvent any wheels that have been invented already. David.
Yeah, just to kind of, I suppose, you do my usual soapboxing for spatial planning, but I do think that many of us now get involved in what might be called spatial planning at a kind of large scale level, which for various reasons has to kind of remain a bit agnostic to land ownership, because the businesses obviously operate within land ownership patterns. But there was quite interesting things said recently about regional spatial strategies in the MP4 guidelines, which just came out last week, which are going to try and look at how we can achieve nature and climate recovery through regional spatial strategies, as well as what's already been mentioned with the nature networks work, which is great. We've obviously got the natural capital tool work, which is being developed, as Patrick will know, through Nature Scot. And that's another tool to bring to the table. I see Claire's mentioned the GHI ones, that's there. And of course, there's the whole kind of 30 by 30 nature networks thing. I mean, all of this requires there to be a spatial plan, which is going to be a magnet for where the money goes. Otherwise, the money just lands ad hoc. So I really just always keep battering on about that. And fisheries management is an attempt at spatial planning as much as anybody else is. So good.
No, very good. Yeah, it's a matrix approach, isn't it? Representing so many different interests, and it's finding that sweet spot. Simon.
So it's a question I don't know if any of us on the call can answer, but I'm just thinking about the number of kind of project directories people are trying to set up, and I'm just sense checking. Do we know how open the carbon registries are, the peatland code registries, to be able to share data in a way which avoids project developers having to type in numerous different forms for different directories?
Sounds like a question for Patrick. I'll put you on the spot there, Patrick. You might be in the best place to answer that.
So if I get the question right, I mean, the thing is that these registries are not very intuitive in terms of navigating and getting access to the information. It's very clunky. It's just a bare list, and then you have to try to reach out to the projects. So that's something that's already been highlighted previously. The question is, is there a way to build a tool that would be overlaying on the registry that would simplify the interactions? Or do we have to lobby the registry, which I don't think they're going to do, because it's not in their cost, their profit to really engage these kind of costs in doing such a tool. So that's definitely something missing, and I don't know really how to resolve that other than building something that would be using the data from the registry itself somehow, or completely build our own thing. Yeah.
There you are, Simon. Something for the alliance maybe to think about and form a working group on. Rosie, you've been waiting patiently. Over to you, Rosie.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Sean, for a really interesting presentation. I guess I wanted to come back to the metrics. I mean, maybe it's a bit of a plug for the Woodland Water Code, but trying to develop metrics to quantify water benefits. But none of that's going to be ready for your kind of end of phase 2. But hopefully it'll be ready in sort of a year's time. But I wanted to ask, for the projects that you've got on your list, just whether there's been work already to try and quantify any of the water benefits of these projects, or kind of either modelling or monitoring plans, if that's something you've already got information on.
So that will vary between projects. So there'll be some river restoration projects that I know of one specifically where gravel's been added in large wood structures downstream of a dam, and there's a robust monitoring place with a consultant to look at that over time. But that exists as sort of a separate report. But what we have in here is a sort of free text field that people can insert links to these reports. So when I was showing the story map and it had all the sort of dots on the map for an individual catchment, people can insert links into that so that then an end user can go and find that report that goes over that monitoring. And I think it would be interesting to try and get some monitoring and even discussions about, sort of credits directly into this. And that is something that I think could be built upon in future years, because I don't see this as a one and done. I see this as something that we review after maybe 5 years, but we continue to build on, because I think this tool has got legs, really. So yeah, I want to see this evolve, and I see this as very much kind of a first iteration of the project. So it would be great to see it evolve over time, and yeah, we could include more of this kind of stuff as well down the line.
I don't know, Sean, whether you wanted to mention the national monitoring programs, particularly on the water temperature and also the electrofishing, just for folks' information, possibly aren't aware of that.
I mean, that's more projects that are led by the Marine Directorate that the boards and trusts and some interchangeably so are contributing to. So in terms of the National Electrofishing Programme, that's one where each catchment has 30 sites, or 15 in some cases randomly selected, but they're all contributing to that national collection of data and analysis for juvenile fish populations. Similarly, with the Scottish River Temperature Monitoring Network, there are quite a few that are have temperature loggers in rivers within their catchments. And although the Marine Directorate lead that project and undertake the modelling work, it's quite often members of the fishery trust or boards that go out and collect the data. But that is something that can be brought into the story maps themselves. So the Marine Directorate have published those outputs as sort of our shiny apps. So it doesn't quite play well with the ArcGIS system, but we're able to embed those tools within the story maps. So again, an end user can see those without having to leave the story map, really. And hopefully that covered what you were thinking, Paul.
Yeah, it was actually. Yeah, no, so yeah, no, perfect. No, thanks for that. I'm just scrolling through to see if there are questions in the chat. There's just some really good chat going on. We will capture all of this. It's all very useful. So keep chatting in the chat. And Louise, you can chat for real.
Yeah, just a quick point, just to come in on that. I was thinking about, go back to the original dashboard and how you'd sort of separated out the different types of actions. And I was just thinking there about the sort of the support for actually delivering a particular action and the need for monitoring. I just wondered if, if we were going out to particular corporates, and those interested in investing in these types of actions or project locations, for example, if you could sort of almost like package up the actions together so that monitoring, for example, wasn't seen as a separate action but part of the the fundamentals of the actual project. So it wasn't an add-on; it was part of, and I think that could be quite powerful and something that we could consider in terms of moving forward, how we sort of package up these projects, be it on a catchment scale, but that monitoring and the support needed for the sort of longer term sustainability of the projects, I think would be quite useful.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and I think yeah, it would be quite beneficial. The sort of reason that monitoring was included as its own separate action is because a lot of the boards and trusts have their own sort of monitoring programs to look at sort of, say, the general health of juvenile fish populations. So their annual electrofishing program that's done out with the Marine Directorate, it doesn't quite fit under, it's hard to categorize that one. But yeah, we could sort of look at that in a bit more depth.
Yeah, but I guess that's why the story maps are really powerful, aren't they?
Yeah.
Pulling out the different elements. Yeah.
Yeah, and it allows them to give that narrative that I think was mentioned earlier in the chat to describe the actions and why they're needed as well.
And I think as the space develops, the requirement for monitoring is going to mushroom, and so I think we're going to have to be clever in what we monitor, how we monitor, whether we increasingly use remote sensing of various different types, how that's verified and so forth. So I think you're right, Louise. I think that is going to become a sort of an industry of its very own, applying to so many of these various different aspects of the nature market that we're trying to develop. So I think that is going to be a massive component. And we've got a lot of people at the moment in many of these projects simply assessing and creating baselines right now so that they can take that monitoring forward. And it's very intense setting up a baseline, let alone measuring how exactly how trends are going to be detected going forwards. So yeah, I think it's a really strong point.
Yep, that's a good point, Paul. There's some interesting chat. I think there are some of the trusts that I know of and others that have created story maps for their individual restoration projects, and that would be quite a good one to host somewhere centrally. But I've also seen Alex's comment about who would manage data from multiple monitoring programs. Maybe that's one of a wider one, but I think what we have here is just kind of a register of actions with any sort of monitoring data sitting with the organisations that are the lead on that action itself. Because once you start sort of bringing in that monitoring data centrally, that needs a dedicated resource to look after it and regulate it. So that's maybe something a bit aspirational, but I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that. No, that's fine then.
I could just do a plug for our survey. We've got a survey on digital enablers for natural capital. So it's what constitutes good biodiversity data and how digital tools can help collect, analyse, give meaning to that. So I was just going to post that in the chat.
Brilliant. Thanks, Julia.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, and I think that's in the Basecamp facility as well, isn't it? Yeah, by all means, post away. Okay, we've just got a couple of minutes to go within our allotted time. It's been a really good session, I think. We've had some really useful interactions and great ideas, and we'll capture all of the chat and use that as and however we can. Are there any last comments, issues, questions that anybody wants to put their hand up and mention before we sign off? If things do come to mind, you'll still have access to the chat, I think, so you can still contribute to that. And if